Okay guys, welcome to this week's show, and today we're going to talk about caring for your rental home. And we're going to look at landlord's obligations and tenant duties as well, because equally the tenant is responsible for things during the tenancy. And a lot of them are unaware of this. I mean, Kerin, you'll be all too aware of some of the responsibilities that people aren't aware of. And I think although most of the responsibilities for caring for a rental home are kind of clearly defined, it's those kind of grey areas that leave the door open for possibly dispute between tenants and landlords, and sometimes a bit like who's responsible for what. So it's, I mean, how important is it, Kerin, to really, this is your responsibility as a tenant, landlord will take care of this, to kind of lay that out as a letting agent. If you're setting up a tenancy, I mean, I suppose it's a very important thing for you and something that you take care of quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So setting that pretense from the first place, this very start of the tenancy, you're setting out the expectations, guidelines, so you can have a smooth tenancy going forward. And the groundwork that you put in at the start of the tenancy should hopefully benefit you at the end as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're making it clear what standard of cleanliness you want, and you've got the right documentation in place, that's effectively your benefit at the end of the tenancy.
It keeps everybody on the same page, and I suppose that really reassures the tenant as well, like, okay, this is what the landlord or the agent's going to take care of if it becomes an issue, and this is what I need to do to make sure I'm keeping things right at my end. And it just keeps everybody on the same page, definitely. Now, of course, some obligations are set out in the law, and some depend on what is agreed in the tenancy agreement. We, of course, have the private residential tenancy here in Scotland, and we have a lot of mandatory clauses in there. If you're down south in England and things, you can obviously edit your agreement quite a lot. So there's a lot of things you could include in there. So it's been quite upfront and making sure that you go through that with your tenant and they know what is actually expected of them within their actual tenancy agreement as well. Others, though, do get left out altogether. And these omissions then can often cause some awkward kind of disagreements, and then that's when people start to not see eye to eye because things have not been clear at the beginning. Fortunately, though, most conflicts can be avoided with the right preparation, the right knowledge and understanding. So today we've put together some of these main points, which will be a guide for caring for the rental home, and that covers the landlord and the tenant responsibilities. We'll go through things around the clearing standards, setting and meeting expectations, as you said there, Kerin, maintenance and repairs, the day-to-day care, and then obviously the bigger fixes as well, outdoor spaces, gardens and balconies, clarifying that exterior upkeep, who's responsible for that, and also communal areas and shared spaces, defining everyone's duties. That comes into play quite a lot when we've got like apartment blocks and things that maybe don't have a factor. Who cleans the stairway, who cleans the communal areas, things like that. And then finally we'll round up and we'll talk about damage and neglect and understanding what wear and tear is and what's lack of care. Wear and tear versus lack of care. They're two very different things, but can easily be mixed up. Deposit resolution and things is where that'll come up quite often, and we'll cover that. So I think it's quite clear that not everything is probably as clear cut as what you would expect. But with these tips that we're going to cover today, over the years and perfecting processes and things, hopefully we'll be able to advise you how to create tenancies free of confusion and full of clarity. It can be achieved quite easily. Some people, and I know a lot of self-managed landlords come to us quite frustrated, and we sometimes always find out that it's just the way it's been set up and the way it's been handled isn't really the right way to do it. And we only know that because obviously years and years of training and continual training to make sure that we're delivering a service as a letting agent, which is quite different from some of the smaller self-managed landlords. But there's a lot of training things out there, but here you could learn quite a lot for free, basically, and we're going to cover it today. And as I say, we're going to kick off with clearing standards, and like you said, Kerin, setting and meeting expectations. So run through some of that with us.
Yeah, so most tenancy misunderstandings and disputes are over cleaning. In almost every case, it comes down to lack of agreement and how the property was handed back versus the check-in. So there's a few, obviously, points to consider when you're doing this. But however, memory and assumption aren't recognised in court if you're going through a deposit protection scheme as well. You have to have the paperwork to back it up there. So getting your property back as clean as it was the day that the tenancy started means having a watertight process. So as we say, documentation here is very important. Handing your property over in a professionally clean state. So obviously making sure it's clean in the first place. You can't expect to get a clean property back if you're not giving a tenant a clean property. Yeah. So making sure it's clean and you have a detailed inventory, including photos of every room, fixtures, fittings, inside of appliances. It has to be very detailed, ideally time and date stamped and done a day or two prior to the tenant moving in as well. So your inventory is a very important document there. And as I say, making sure the property is nice and clean before somebody moves in as well.
Yeah, the first thing before you mentioned inventories, when you said professionally clean, the first thing I thought about was inventories and deposit reclaims, and it's all about the terminology. Like you say, your inventory has to be really comprehensive and full of information. And like you say, even pictures inside appliances, like the drawer of the washing machine and things. But the terminology, like something could be professionally clean or it could be domestically clean.
These and are two a high domestic standard or a low domestic standard?
Yeah. And it can get a bit technical, but if you've got a good inventory clerk who does that for you as a third party independent, is the best way to do that. And they will be trained to put in the right terminology in there, which will help you with a deposit claim if you need to do that.
Yeah, so obviously staying on that inventory topic, making sure part of your inventory also includes that the tenant must return the property to the same state, include everything that they're going to need to do as well. So obviously prior to a tenant moving out, we have end of tenancy checklist. So it breaks down and it highlights everything that they need to do ahead of moving out. Most of it you think would just be general common sense, make sure the property is clean, it's tidy, it's empty, do your meter readings, all those things. But again, as common sense is, not everybody has it. So it's best to avoid any disputes, have everything really nice and clear and in black and white as well. So such as making sure that they know to clean the floors, the windows, oven, shelves. An oven can be quite a big one as well that we come across because they don't get cleaned very often. Sometimes a tenant might forget to do it before they move out. They might just not do it. And if it's been clean at the start of the tenancy, for a professional oven clean, you're looking at you're over £50 for it. So making sure that that's detailed in your inventory as well. So you've got that basis there is really important and avoids any doubt.
Yeah.
And if your ongoing tenant then fails to leave the property in a professionally clean state, you can arrange yourself to take the cost out the security deposit. However, if you don't have an inventory, you don't have grounds to do that. So making sure that you have that in the right place, that is what's going to strengthen your claim at the end of the tenancy if you do have to claim against the deposit.
Yeah, deposit claim is really important at the end. And the only way to do it properly is to have things set up initially.
And again, it's not just safeguarding the landlord, it is safeguarding your tenant as well. I mean, you can get some landlords that might try and claim for cleaning that it wasn't, as I say, as clean when they moved in. They might try and charge for an oven clean, but the oven wasn't clean when they moved in. So for a tenant, it's that bit of security as well. So making sure that you do go through your inventory at the start and note anything that's maybe not been included in it or that's not very clear that you notice that's different, making sure that you have that time to go through and make any amendments if need be.
Just quickly about inventories there as well. The inventory, if you don't have an inventory in place and the oven was clean when they moved in and it wasn't when they move out, you've no evidence to back that up. The deposit scheme will go in favour with the tenant because there's no evidence to say that it wasn't, and they can't prove that. And that's where you'll completely lose the deposit claim straight away without having that evidence. Now, prior to private residential tenancies coming into play in 2017, at the end of 2017, inventories were a thing, but they weren't really mandatory. They are part of the PRT now, and they're in there as a document that you should have. I mean, I don't think there's any real penalty or you're penalised for it if you're not having one. It's more that it's at your own peril, to be honest. And we always advise, as part and parcel of our process, that an inventory is put in place for every property.
Yes. And having that detailed upfront documentation is the bedrock of caring for your rental property. As humans, tenants can miss things or things might not get done, but having that comprehensive inventory creates a foolproof checklist for ending the tenancy smoothly.
Yeah.
And again, definitely. You can't dispute what's in black and white and photographed in front of you. So.
And of course, the tenant agrees to that at the beginning and signs an agreement to that. They get, is it 7 days to review the inventory, just to make, and they can make some amendments if some things are not a true reflection of what they're seeing when they move in, and then that gets updated obviously so that everybody's happy in agreement at the beginning. Yeah, so yeah, I think with the cleanliness and things, inventories are very, very important. And then that means we move on to the maintenance and repairs. And like I said earlier, whether it's the day-to-day care or whether it's the bigger fixes and the bigger jobs, the rules for landlords and tenants' responsibilities are fairly well established. I mean, who's responsible for what? Although there is some crossover areas, and that's what shows that the maintenance side of things, it is kind of a two-way street. So you need to be aware who's responsible for what, and then these kind of grey areas, which I'm going to cover. So firstly, I mean, landlord's responsibilities, the structural repairs, the electrical, the plumbing, any problems with that, if there is water ingress, leaking, rainwater from gutters or anything exterior, mechanical breakdowns like the boiler. I mean, that's one of the most common repairs, especially in the winter months here in Scotland. Boiler repairs, definitely the landlord. Appliances, if they've been provided as part of the let. And of course, any other heating systems and things, if it's electrical heaters and any heating system that's in place. All of these things are the landlord's responsibility. And if you're involved with lettings to any degree, I'm sure you'll be aware of that. Or if you've been a tenant for a while, you'll be aware that that is the landlord's responsibility. Tenants' responsibilities. Here's sometimes where it can be a wee bit, not everybody's too sure. Right up there, changing light bulbs. Now, I will always say at the beginning of tenancy, every light in the house should have a bulb in it that works. And then from there on, the tenant is responsible for replacing these. Testing smoke alarms. Now, we do test smoke alarms intermittently on property visits and things to make sure, but the tenant's responsible for doing that as well, just to make sure that if they're the older style hardwired and they have a backup battery, is that battery, sometimes we'll get calls about these beeping, and it's because the backup battery is actually needing replaced, although the unit is still functional. Replacing batteries in these units is also the tenant's responsibility as long as there was a battery in place at the beginning. Maintaining ventilation. This is one of your ones, Kerin, that you continually tell people. Whether that's opening a window for a short period each day to ventilate, making sure you use the extractor fans, whether that's in the kitchen or the bathroom and these kind of areas, to avoid the build-up of damp and mould in these problematic areas. And then the general upkeep that prevents damage as well. Just keeping the place free of excessive clutter and things as well. We've been in some properties where there is a excess amount of items and things piled up against walls, no windows open, curtains shut, no ventilation, and it's a recipe for disaster, and it can be really detrimental to the property and to the tenant's health as well.
Yeah, that's the situation that the tenants wonder why they've got mold growing, and it's like, look. So educating them as well. It's like,
education is the key, and I think you don't know what you don't know, and we obviously talk about all this quite fluidly and easily because it's what we do day to day. Some tenants, maybe somebody that's never let before, new landlords who have never let before, they rely on the advice of professionals, which we consider ourselves to be. So it's our job to educate people, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. And I feel like education is the key to making the whole private sector function, and it just makes everybody's life so much easier because everybody knows what's expected of them and what should be done. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes.
And I'm sure anybody watching will agree. I'll agree, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. A tenant will take a lot of reassurance in a landlord or an agent who says, right, this is what you're responsible for, make sure you do this, and I'll make sure that I take care of all my stuff and actually follow through with that on time and when they're supposed to, as a key element as well. So
and
that's landlord.
Agent in place as well makes a difference, because sometimes I think if you just have a tenant and landlord, the tenant could be like, oh, they're just trying to fob me off here and make me do it myself. Yeah. However, when you've got an agent that's that third party buffer, it is like, no, this is your responsibility, this is what you need to be doing, and then this is what your landlord needs to be doing. So it just creates a bit of a balance, I think, between the two as well, to avoid a bit more friction that can occur if you just have a landlord and a tenant.
Yeah one of the the ones that always I feel is a bit of a recipe for disaster is when self-managed landlords put people they know in properties.
You're going to say that.
And I do feel, and you feel ashamed because they're obviously just trying to do a good thing, but it just very
friends and
rarely
family
works.
just.
I mean, it does work. I mean, I've seen it, but it very rarely works.
Very rarely.
Which is a shame, but that's just the way of it, and such as people. But yeah, so that's landlord's responsibilities, tenants' responsibilities. Then there's some situations where it turns out maybe possibly the tenant is at fault. Do you know, it's maybe a repair that falls under the landlord's responsibility. But if the tenant's at fault, then this is where things start to unravel. Things like misuse of appliances, possibly, do you know, if you're overloading a washing machine with powder, if you are putting things down the toilet that shouldn't be. I mean, we've had kids' toys and you name it, we've had the list of it. One thing as well is pouring oil down sinks and drains and toilets and things as well. That's something that over time causes issues. And if it's found by the plumber that that's the issue, it could fall back to the tenant as responsibility for payment of that repair. But yeah, we've had kids' toys pulled out toilets, we've had oil down drains, and a lot of other unsanitary things that we won't go through. But yeah, it does happen. And that, as I say, the most important thing there to think about if you're a tenant, if you're not being very responsible in how you're treating things or using things, the cost is going to fall back on you. And if you can't afford to fund that at the time, it will be marked against your deposit at the end. So yeah. So I think ultimately caring for your rental home is a shared responsibility. Tenants should look after the property and report issues really promptly. That's something that some creeps up. Do you know, like, oh, this has been, and they're like, how long has this been going on? And it's like X amount of weeks or even months. And then it's like they haven't reported it until it's really bad, where it could have got nipped in the bud a lot earlier. So yeah, reporting issues promptly. But while landlords should have a responsive and resolve matters really swiftly, agents and landlords, if something's reported that needs attention, just get it done instead of leaving things too long. Now, I know obviously there is some other factors that come into that, contractor availability. Do you know, if there's parts or material and things, do you know, things can't just be fixed overnight. I think that's something that we come up against quite a lot, is that the expectation of landlords and agents in the private sector is that things should be done overnight. And with the best will in the world, we try and get things fixed as soon as possible. But do you know, there is external factors that we can't control all the time, like the ones that I've just run through. So you have to be appreciative of a timescale. But as the agent and the landlord, lay out that agenda, a timescale with the tenant. Say, right, contractor's been, this is what needs done. They're going to order a part, or we're going to order this material. It's going to take X amount of days. We'll book in the work for this day. Do you know? And then, so at least everybody knows what to expect. Communication is the key thing there. And yeah, and then that keeps everybody on the same page again. But yeah, maintenance and repairs, it is quite clearly defined if you're familiar with lettings, what the landlord and tenant responsibilities are. But there's a few things where it will cross over, and you need to kind of look at what the individual situation shows you to who is responsible for maintenance and repairs. So you're going to talk to us about gardens and balconies and exterior spaces, Kerin.
Yes, so quite often gardens, shared spaces can be left out of the tenancy agreements, which can leave them resulting in being left unkept, unmaintained, and they can become very overgrown, and then it's expensive to have to try and get them dealt with.
Gardens are really expensive.
Yeah.
If they're in a bad state, it could cost quite a lot to get them back to a management condition.
And again, that comes back to regular inspections as well, making sure that your tenant's also keeping on top of it throughout the tenancy, but setting the standard in the first place is obviously key, so they know what area of the garden is theirs and what their expectations are and their responsibilities around it. So it is important to include this within the tenancy and specify exactly who's to do what. So for tenants, basic garden maintenance like cutting the grass, watering potted plants, sweeping patios or decking areas, and keeping them clear of moss and weeds. So I would say weeding and grass cutting are the two basic things that tenants are responsible for. However, landlords can be responsible for the larger things such as trimming large hedges, lopping trees, ensuring that fences, walls and shared structures are left safe and secure. especially in the weather that we get as well. I mean, we've had countless storms this year, so making sure your fences are a big one, making sure that they are secure. And even
We've spent a
sheds.
good part of this year still clearing up the mess from the storm at the tail end of last year. So, well, yeah.
Yes. And things as well, like replacing rotten decking or broken pavers as well. So again, tenants have their basic responsibilities, cutting grass, weeding. Landlords, there are still some garden aspects that you are going to have to deal with moving forward. So it is good that if you have a property that you maybe make some tweaks to the garden to make it nice and low maintenance. So it is ultimately the tenant's responsibility for the majority of it, but still you're probably going to have fences to keep on top of, possibly some decking bits and pieces. So making sure you know who's responsible for what is key there.
We also, I mean, we have a big variety of properties from 1-bedroom flats all the way up to, 5 and 6 bedroom detached houses with big massive gardens. And the bigger properties, there's a lot of them come with gardeners, and whether the landlord splits it with the tenant or takes care of it completely, because you can't expect a tenant to fund or even be able to manage, mature trees and shrubs and things that are very extensive and large. Like you say, mowing the lawn and doing the weeds, that's a different thing.
Yeah, and at the end of the day as well, these plants have probably been there for quite a long time and probably require certain time of the years to be cut and certain ways to prune them. So if you do have a more mature garden, it can be beneficial to have a gardener in there to make sure that it's being looked after. And as we say, gardens like that as well can become quite unruly. So and it can be a lot of expense getting them cut back if they've not been kept on top of.
Yeah.
And again, if some landlords might like to leave things, some tools for the tenants, but if you are leaving tools like a lawnmower, shears for them to use, be sure to include them in your inventory along with the photos of the garden when they move in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they should all be logged in the inventory.
Yeah, you don't want a tenant going away with your lawnmower if it's part of the let.
Yeah.
But if an outdoor space is large or complex to manage, as we say, it's often more efficient to get the landlord to hire a gardener. It guarantees the correct maintenance is getting done and protects the value of any precious assets that you have in the garden as well.
Yeah, and sometimes with the bigger properties, a lot of times if they're being let, then they are not usually part of a typical maybe buy-to-let portfolio as such. It's usually an ex-family home, or people have, they're away working overseas or whatever, and they're letting this family home for a period of time. So they've probably got a lot of plants and things that are meaningful in the garden. So to ensure that they're looked after properly, the gardener then comes into play, I think.
Or even just if there is one like that you're precious of, let the tenants know. We have one and it has an apple tree in it, and it was a wedding gift for the landlord. So it's a very special tree to them. So when the tenants moved in, we made them aware and we were like, please be very cautious around this tree. It obviously has a lot of sentimental value, and they do. So when we go out and do the inspections, I did one recently, and it was the last time I spoke to them, I was like, your apple tree's doing well. And it's just that nice peace of mind for them that, you've taken that on board, and so is the tenant as well, and looking after it. So if you do have things like that, make the tenant aware so they know. You can sometimes get tenants that get a little bit green finger happy and go a little bit overboard with maybe cutting back the garden. So you don't want to lose anything that is of sentimental value to yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But obviously you do get communal gardens as well. So making sure that if you are moving a tenant and they know either what area is, if it's being divided up, what area belongs to them, or making sure that they're aware that they still have responsibility for dealing with the communal garden. So most of the time it is speaking to the neighbours, seeing who's happy to do what, maybe take it in turns, things like that, but making sure that they're aware that even if it is a shared garden, they still have responsibility for the upkeep of it.
Yeah, so communal areas and shared spaces. I mean, if you own a rental property which is in a building, and I mentioned that at the beginning, if it's in a building or a block, and there's communal areas and shared spaces, the responsibility for these should be clearly stated in the tenancy agreement or in possibly your terms ahead of the tenancy, so that everybody knows that they're responsible and what they're responsible for. Now, some examples of that, like obviously if you're in a block of apartments, you've got communal hallways and stairways. And typically there'll be a managing agent for the building. That's not your letting agent. Like there'll be a factor, as we call it. for the building, which is usually responsible for the lighting, the cleaning, fire safety equipment, if there's fire extinguishers and things, and just the general upkeep. That and the cost of that will be payable by the landlord as part of their ownership of the property. So yeah, stairways and things. But there is some buildings that don't have factors and things in place. And a lot of, if it's a mix of maybe private let and private owners, the people that live there on a permanent basis will probably have, this unspoken, like, oh, I'll do this day, you do this day, and that's the type of thing. And if that is in place, then, if you speak to the neighbours as the agent or the landlord, and then relay that to the tenant, like, look, they do a day about cleaning the stairs and hoovering or whatever, you take your turn, and then that's fine and everybody gets involved. If it's external spaces like residence gardens, these are usually looked after again by the building's managing agent, not the letting agent, the factor. But in some cases, the responsibility lies with the owner again, and the landlords or the owners of the individual home. So then there might be a responsibility for some garden maintenance, even if you're staying in a flat and there's a communal area outside. And again, it'll probably be set up on a rota system of some sort. So having that knowledge and passing it on to the tenant is so important. I'm also going to cover HMOs. We don't do HMOs, but HMOs are a house of multiple occupancy. And if you've got 4 or 5 individual bedrooms and people living in a property, you're going to have shared areas like kitchens and bathrooms and things as well. Now, landlords usually include possibly like a monthly cleaning fee for these within the rent, and then somebody will come in and take care of these communal areas. With tenants required to maybe treat them just obviously as you would in a private kitchen or bathroom or something in your own home, just that bit respectfully and responsibly, and don't leave lots of mess and dishes and things as best they can. But yeah, generally in HMOs, I would imagine if it's especially larger HMOs, I think that they have a cleaner that comes in and just does the once over. Nothing drastic, but just to make sure everything's kept as it is, because there is still a responsibility for the tenant to act responsibly and kind of clean up at the back of themselves as such. But I think a periodic, like kind of deeper clean is done by cleaners. As I say, we don't do HMOs, we don't deal with HMOs, but I know that that's the setup generally that happens. But I think regardless of the type of communal area or shared space that there is, tenants should be instructed to avoid, if it's communal, storing personal items. These are probably going to be routes for exit and entry, possibly escape routes for a fire. If it's a lane, stairway, or an alleyway or something, you don't want bikes and things all piled up there if there's a fire and people have to use that for an escape route. So yeah, communal areas are not for personal items to be stored. And the most important thing there is fire risk and obstructing a fire exit. So keep that in mind as well, especially in HMOs as well, but also in blocks of flats and apartments. If you've got lots of bikes out on the stairway and you're on the second floor and there's three floors above you and there's a fire, you're gonna impede somebody's exit. So yeah, be very, very cautious of communal areas and shared spaces. But again, as long as it's all laid out and quite clear at the beginning, everybody knows what they're doing, it should be fine. Now we're going to round up today and talk about damage and neglect, and I think this really relates back to the inventory and deposit claims, and there's a bit of confusion sometimes about what is damage, what is neglect, what's wear and tear, what's not. So yeah, you're going to round us off with that, Kerin, and you're quite experienced in dealing with this, so I think I'll let you run with damage and neglect.
Yeah, so damage and neglect can take their toll on a rental home, but it's worth remembering that landlords and tenants can both be guilty parties. And in fact, a neglectful landlord can lead to a tenant that doesn't care. Yeah. So it's important to make sure that you're keeping on top of it. If you care, your tenant should hopefully care in return, and you have a well looked after property, which is what everybody wants ultimately. You can't charge a tenant for fair wear and tear, and landlords can be fined for certain areas of neglect. But how are those areas defined? So here are some typical examples. So fair wear and tear, this covers areas such as natural signs such as worn carpets, flooring in high traffic areas, minor plaster cracks, paint scuffs, discoloured grouting, and mild surface scratches. So these are little things that can occur on a regular basis. Like if you've got somebody in the property, you're going to get little scuffs to the wall, small areas, as we say, a high traffic flooring. It's going to take its toll on it as well. And you have to factor in who's staying in the property. If you have, for example, a single person in your property, you're going to expect less wear and tear than you would from a family of 4 or somebody that's got pets. So you need to factor in who's staying in the property into accounting for the wear and tear as well. And how long a tenant's been in the property as well. If you've got a tenant that's been in for 6 months and the walls are all scuffed, that is exceeding wear and tear. That is not what you should have after such a short period of time. However, if that family had been there for 3-4 years and you had these scuffs on the wall, that's wear and tear. So there's different things to factor in when you're considering, is it wear and tear or is it damage? So damage by tenants can be things such as burn on carpets, large holes in walls, cracked window glass, smashed tiles, broken handles, and permanent stains that can be deducted from the security deposit. So again, bigger things that you're going to have to get rectified.
Yeah.
But areas such as landlord neglect can include ignoring tenants' problems, particularly around health hazards such as damp and mould, and failing to obtain safety certificates. Fines are very heavy for this. So making sure your property is compliant and that you are upholding your part of what needs to be done as well as a landlord.
Yeah, I think the safety certificates is obviously paramount. And I think even not just for the fact that it's the law, I think for a moral obligation when it comes to gas safety and smoke alarms and things. I mean, the fine and things aside, if there was a fire or a gas leak or something in your property and you didn't have the proper equipment to detect that or make sure it was safe in the first place, would you want that on your conscience as a landlord? No.
Yeah, gas safety is like the biggest one that you have to keep on top of, and it's done annually as well. So it's not like it's, I mean, an EICR for your electrical side is every 5 years. So it's obviously we don't need to keep on top of that quite so regularly, but making sure, for example, your tenants have still got their smoke alarm heads up. The times you can go in and they're like, oh, it was beeping, I took it down, and it's like, well, get it back up. Replace the battery and put it back up.
And the carbon monoxide detector as well. Yeah.
And again,
they go missing quite often.
They do, especially because your boiler quite often is in an area such as a kitchen cupboard or a bedroom cupboard. There's things getting moved around in these areas. So carbon monoxide alarms, they do disappear sometimes. So making sure that your tenant still has it in place and it's in the right place and it's working as well. Still has batteries, still has a flashing light on it, making sure it's working. I
think, and then what's good, our inventory clerk also notes that at the beginning for us, I mean, we do check at move-in and things anyway, but this is just obviously, like you say, the day prior, and writes on the report that they're all in place, that they're working, the date they expire. That's all the smoke alarms and the carbon monoxide detector.
Yeah, so the very best way to avoid neglect and damage is to make regular property inspections to catch minor issues early, be very rigorous with your safety and your maintenance, and set an example that your tenants will follow.
Yeah, and it's not difficult. I mean, like I say, we do talk about this quite easily and fluidly because it's something we do every day. And if you are self-managing or you have tenants and things, and you do find this difficult to keep up with and things, then reach out to us. I mean, we happily have a chat, advise people on the correct way to manage a property, who's responsible for what, or point you in the right direction to get further information and training, whether that's the Scottish Association of Landlords, whether that's Landlord Accreditation Scotland. I mean, you should be part of one of these kind of bodies within the private rented sector to keep yourself right if you're self-managing anyway. And I do imagine, I mean, Kerin, you and I are both Let Well certified to do lettings in Scotland. Every agent, I mean, not every agent, but every agency at least has to have one person in their agency who has that qualification. And I think in time, private landlords will have to have some level of qualification as well to let privately. If you're unsure, though, I mean, as agents, and you are finding maybe the maintenance too much to manage and the responsibilities, then reach out to us. My direct contact number and my email is in the blog that's attached to this, which just runs through basically what we've just covered today as tips for, caring for your rental home. And that's, like I say, not just the landlord's responsibilities, but also the tenants as well. So if you want to look through that or contact us, you could get the information in the blog attached to this post. And that's us for this show. Thanks for that, Kerin. And I think the most important thing there is the initial setup and the communication for me throughout, and just making sure everybody's being really transparent about who's responsible for what. But you'll know all too well, setting up the tenancies at that start point, having all the right information at the beginning, and then if you need to, educating whether it's the landlord or the tenant of the correct protocol for things, and laying that groundwork at the beginning.
Yeah, the documentation is there to help both landlords and tenants, so making sure that you're putting it in place. It's there, so use it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, any questions, you could jump in the comments, you could reach out to us direct. We will be happy to help and assist in any way we can. And we'll leave it there today. Hopefully that has been very helpful to anyone who's been tuning in, and you'll catch us next time. And until then, we will see you later. Bye, Kerin.
See you later.